Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Obviously, we are in a little bit of a different location today. We're actually out of town on a business trip, but it is raining a lot today and Drew's not feeling super well. So I thought I'd make this day even worse by subjecting Drew to some crazy pastor clips, specifically from Mark Driscoll.
This is going to be great.
If you don't know who Mark Driscoll is, I think that you'll probably get a feel for what he's all about by the end of this video, but I also have some other videos on him if you want to check those out.
And also, Piggy is asleep right here behind us because we have been very busy.
So these are some shorts that Mark Driscoll has put on his channel. They're mostly from like sermons of his, but there are some that are just from interviews.
Okay.
But just so you know.
I have a woke pastor. What do I do, Mark?
Get the hell out.
Well, I can change him, Mark. It's kind of like a marriage. I can change him.
Yeah, no, you can't. If you see that he is weak and woke, then who he is worse because all you're getting is a portion of who they truly are and what they truly believe. And what happens with weak and woke pastors, they keep moving the line until there is no line. And so we heard this, there was a gal named Hillary Clinton, speaking of Jezebel spirits, and she's like, we want abortion to be rare, safe, and legal. We know that's not true. It was just we want to move the line, and then we're going to move it again, and then we're going to move it again. Gay marriage is not the last line. It's like we want to have gay marriage, and then we want to have polygamy, and that's coming in our lifetime.
Yep.
And then we want to move, minor attracted persons, which is, pedophilia, changing the age of consent. And so if your pastor is good at going backward and not forward, it's only a matter of time before he backs himself off a cliff, so don't follow him.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, so they went from he's woke, like he is into progressive politics is what I'm guessing, and that will lead to the pastor promoting pedophilia.
Yeah. Mark Driscoll loves to use the term woke, which it's 2023. Aren't conservatives past the using woke?
Oh no, we're in prime time for that one.
I mean, haven't they moved on to like trans issues by now? But first of all, the term woke came from African American culture, and it was used to alert their fellow African Americans of the discrimination and prejudice that they faced in their communities.
Yeah.
And conservatives like Mark Driscoll have appropriated that term to mean pretty much anybody that's to the left of them. So anyone...
Moderate conservatives even?
Yeah, anyone that's more progressive than them.
Yeah.
So when Mark Driscoll says woke, he just means anybody who's even slightly more progressive than he and his church are.
Wow. Do you think it's for theological reasons that he groups together being, moderately conservative rather than extremely conservative with something? I mean, it's not a political thing to be a minor attracted person. You know what I mean? It's you were a pedophile. It's not a political stance. And being okay with that is not like a political stance that it's more accepted on the left versus the right or something.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a theological grouping there or pairing that he's doing there? Or do you think that he actually thinks that for some reason on the other political side, this is genuinely what the ideology leads to?
I think that he is using fear tactics to keep people in his group and thinking what he wants them to think, because this is just a slippery slope fallacy.
Yeah.
Because this has happened because we legalized abortion, which, is not legal now in most states.
Yeah.
Or because gay marriage is legal, that ultimately that's going to lead to us legalizing pedophilia.
Yeah. Meant to make people upset and afraid of, doing something that Mark Driscoll wouldn't 100% approve of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's no evidence to suggest that in the future we're going to allow things like that to be legal or be okay.
Yeah. When I was younger and I would discuss gay marriage and why I thought that constitutionally it makes sense for it to be legal with church leaders and family members, the main thing they would usually say is, well, where do you then draw the line? Because if a man can marry a man, can a man marry a horse? And then bestiality is just encouraged, and now we have to give out, wedding certificates or marriage certificates to people who are getting married to animals. Doesn't the logic follow to that? I mean, were you taught that?
Yeah, somewhat. And it's like they don't acknowledge the fact that there's something called consent, and especially the LGBT community and progressives really champion the idea of consent, that sexual contact is only appropriate in situations in which every single party consents.
Yeah.
And so they kind of ignore that or act like that's not a thing that people talk about.
Yeah, I thought that as a Christian, at least I was trying to steel man the other side when I was a conservative Christian. I would say that. And the response I would usually get was, well, Drew, that's just a cop-out. They don't really believe that, which he kind of said they don't really believe this.
Mm-hmm.
This is inevitably where it leads. Why does it inevitably lead to that, though? I've never really gotten any real reasons.
Yeah, I don't know either.
You think it's just, okay, this doesn't agree with me, therefore it's spiritually evil, and everything else I think is spiritually evil is automatically in the same, category. And so they're all kind of basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, lazy thinking.
Thought it was interesting when he brought up the thing about Hillary Clinton and talking about how she says we want to make abortion rare and safe, but that's not really what she means.
Yeah, she can't.
What does
actually
he believe that she actually means with that? Because is he saying that Hillary Clinton actually wants abortion to be something that's very commonplace and not safe?
The thing that clues me in on what I think he's trying to get at there is that he called her a Jezebel spirit. And I know that Mark Driscoll believes that people who are like woke are possessed by demons.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he thinks, demons want to destroy humanity. And so people who disagree with me are all possessed by demons. That means that everyone who disagrees with me wants to destroy humanity.
That must be their end goal, is to make everything super horrible and shitty.
That's, I think that your first comment on it was the most insightful. This is just about striking fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And demonizing anyone that disagrees.
Literally.
Yeah.
The church doesn't pick the fight, but we will have the fight. And there is a battle to be had for the church to remain pure in an age of confusion and compromise. And the world can believe whatever it wants to believe, but the church believes some things that are quite different. The world can follow the spirit of the age, but we will follow the Spirit of God. This is the house of the Lord. You are the people of the Lord. This place belongs exclusively to our God and Savior, Jesus Christ, and we are exclusively under the authority of His Word. Now, others may not believe that, but that's who we are, and that's what we believe.
I always find it really funny when Mark Driscoll is saying that, no, the thing that dictates our culture and what we are, who we are, what we do, is this unchanging book or this unchanging word that's been passed down for thousands of years, basically. When you see the sermon, you see the style of church, you see the way that he talks, you see the dress, you see the things he talks about, like with modesty and women preachers and masculinity, and it's all so modern.
Mm-hmm.
Ridiculously so. And then he's saying that this is all original to some ancient Christian culture, basically.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's totally, he really is like missing the log in his own eye.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There was this other short that I didn't include in the ones that we're going to watch today, but it was him being interviewed and someone asked him like how he would respond to people saying that he's too political. And he answered with, well, I'm not political, like I'm biblical. Like these are not political issues. These are biblical issues. As though his view of the Bible isn't through his own cultural lens, which is pretty much comes from like conservative Republican talking points.
Clearly.
Really what he does is he already has these like conservative beliefs of his.
Yeah.
And he views the Bible and interprets the Bible through that lens.
Right.
And he thinks it's the other way around. He thinks that he takes the Bible and then that's how he views the world and how he forms his political beliefs.
Yeah.
When it's actually the other way around.
I totally agree. Isn't it funny how people who think that literature has a 100% objective definition are the people who are the most blind to their own subjectivity, to their own interpretive bias?
Yeah.
It's hilarious, honestly.
I thought it was really interesting also in that short that at the beginning he was talking about how the church needs to be ready for a battle. But then he also said that like it's okay for people outside of the church. It's okay for non-Christians to believe what they believe. Like we're going to believe what we believe. And that's that.
Yeah.
So it's like, which is it? Is it okay? Is there going to be this battle? Or is it okay for people just to be tolerant of one another and, stay in their own lane?
Yeah.
He kind of acts as though both things are happening.
I mean, he thinks that we are supposed to be engaging in spiritual warfare to literally take over the entire world and convert 100% all people to Christianity. And if we're not trying to do that, we're not even real Christians in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's not just like saying we're going to battle. He's saying we're going to go conquer.
Right. But then he's also saying that it's okay if you guys just do your own thing somewhere else. But I know he also doesn't actually mean that, because he does think things like being trans or homosexuality or abortion, those all need to be illegal, and like it's not okay for people to choose those things for their own life.
Yeah.
So it's like you don't actually believe that it's okay for people to just do what they want if they're not part of the church.
Yeah.
You get in denominations, you get these Ahab, passive, weak, cowardly pastors that will tell you what they're for, but not what they're against, and they're not up for the fight.
And it is the masculine role to say no.
That's Elijah. He hunts, fishes, and loves every minute of it and lives in the woods. And he shows up and he just rebukes them. He calls down fire from heaven, and then he slaughters over 400 of their false prophets. Imagine a pastor today that had the stones to pick a fight and then slaughter 400 denominational leaders, slit their throats as a public event. That's Elijah.
This is why I think that Mark Driscoll is one of the most dangerous pastors in America today.
Yeah.
Because he's upholding this example of Elijah literally going out and killing what he thinks are false prophets, and is basically saying we need as a church to get back to this.
Yeah.
We need to get back to just killing people that don't align with our theological teachings.
It's like a very thinly veiled call to violence.
Yeah, that's he's always like, that's kind of a regular thing in his sermons, is kind of this like call to violence, or acting as though being violent is a good thing.
Yeah, and that's the masculine role that men must have. As I have studied the Old Testament, I discovered that many, or most, like the vast majority of scholars, Christian and not, tend to see the Old Testament at like things like the story of Elijah specifically as not historical stories. There's not actual archaeological or textual evidence that confirms that these figures actually necessarily existed. Maybe some of the kings, but prophets, not so sure.
A story that we can just learn from.
Right. It's a story, and when treated as a story, I suppose it's one thing. When you take it very literally, it maybe will make you act like they did in the story. But the intention of the story, it seems, was to act as political propaganda to the ancient Jews who were being oppressed by, or were surrounded by, much more powerful nations. And it was supposed to basically do what Mark Driscoll does when he gets up and preaches, which is to say, you all need to be strong, form something like a military organization, and defend, this power structure that has me at the top.
Yeah.
So most people were not literate being taught the stories of like Elijah. They weren't reading them for themselves. You had powerful and more educated people teaching basically illiterate or just uneducated people about these stories in order to codify power around them. And that's basically what Mark Driscoll is doing. It's just that the people he's speaking to are more educated. So he uses like this very inflammatory kind of delivery in order to make people emotional and more susceptible to his manipulation.
Yeah, he uses kind of like an aggressive, brash preaching style to get people to listen or follow him, even though what he's saying doesn't always make sense, or a lot of the time doesn't make sense.
Right.
And I think that really is what he's doing, because it's all about like the church is going to battle, we're going to battle, and he happens to be on the side that he thinks is right and good, and he's at the very top of that like power hierarchy.
Right.
So it's like everything is about making sure that he has his followers and him at the top.
Right.
The reason that some single guys don't take the initiative and pursue is because they're afraid of what? Rejection. Welcome to being a man. You're going to need to get used to being rejected. You're not going to get the job. You will get the job and lose the job. You will have friends who will betray you. You will have people who abandon you. Welcome to being a man. If you want to succeed, you need to endure a certain amount of rejection. And so it says in the Bible, a man takes a wife, and it says that daughters are given in marriage. If you're a single guy and you're like, I'd like to get married. Okay, leave your mother and father, prove your independence, prove your maturity, and then take the risk and take the initiative.
I don't necessarily disagree with like the base message of this. I mean, I think it's important to teach everybody, not just men, that you will face rejection in your life. I don't think that's a bad thing for him to be saying. I don't understand why he focuses so much on men, as though this is only something that men will experience and not just a universal experience for everybody that lives in society.
I think that Mark Driscoll believes in the idea that our current woke society is undermining masculinity, and masculinity is kind of what will save us. You know, he sees Jesus as like driving like a big like lifted truck and like chugging a beer and throwing out the window at an immigrant, right?
Yeah.
So I think that he sees masculinity as fundamentally heroic, and so that's why he's talking about that. One thing that I notice in that is that he's pointing out that people face rejection and that we have to realize that we will face trials and challenges, and that is a part of life.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where Mark Driscoll ends in helping people get through that. He says, this is going to happen. Tough shit.
Yeah.
It happened to me. It's going to happen to you too. Go cry about it. Or you can be a good person and just shut the fuck up about it and try to do better.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, there's a lot in scripture about compassion too. I don't understand why we can't say, like this is going to happen to you. You're going to have to deal with that. And I will be here with you as your leader, trying to give you advice, give you some comfort when I can. Ultimately, it's your journey to take, but it's okay to express your feelings. Like, I think that it's actually weaker to pretend that you don't have any sensitivity,
that everything's fine,
and that you can just like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, rather than being like, I am feeling very vulnerable and sensitive and I need to talk about this with someone, and then from there take it on.
Mm-hmm. And we also have to remember that the point of him saying all of this is to say to single men that they need to be, going after things and getting a job and doing work in order to get a wife. And it's not like a consensual thing, because he's saying in the Bible, it says you will take, or I can't remember the wording.
Take a wife.
You'll take a wife, or a woman will be given. So it's all about, again, conquering and acquiring things. And that's what you're supposed to do as a godly man.
Right.
When we're feeling emotional, or we're upset, or we're hurt, or we're bitter, or we're disappointed, or we're shocked, we tend to start in the rear brain, and that's when you get very emotional, and you tend not to be very rational or very spiritual. And it literally is then taking every thought captive in obedience to Christ. It's being transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's saying, okay, I'm going to invite the Holy Spirit in, wise counsel in, I'm going to pray and reflect, I'm going to get it to the front brain so that we're not just emotionally escalating, but we are reasonably de-escalating the situation.
So this short is titled How to Not Be Overly Emotional. I thought this would be a good one for you to respond to, specifically since you majored in psychology in college.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering him saying like you start with, your emotion in the back brain and then you like move it to the front brain. Are those terms that are actually used in psychology, or is he just kind of like bullshitting here?
I mean, no, like what he seems to be saying, or at least I'm going to interpret this charitably, he's saying that you notice that you have an emotion, instead of just like grabbing onto it and becoming immersed in it, you allow it to exist separate from yourself as much as you can, and then you try to put it in perspective with other thoughts. And that's kind of like a cognitive behavioral type approach. The thing is here, though, my problem is not what he is saying, actually. I mean, he's saying things in all spiritual woo-woo language, which isn't great, but it could be worse. My problem here is Mark Driscoll is notoriously one of the angriest and least emotionally controlled pastors that I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And he also uses other people being emotional as a weapon against them. He's like, okay, when I get angry, it's righteous anger because we're in a war and we need anger, and anger is masculine.
Good. Anger,
Yeah,
anger is
aggression,
masculine.
right. But then when other people, have emotions like they're sad to see someone else suffering that's outside the group.
Or they tell him that they feel like they've been wronged by him and they're upset by it.
Right. Then he weaponizes, oh, you're being overly emotional. Your emotions are the enemy and you're just giving into that. You need to be rational and, stoic like me.
Yeah.
And so this is something that just exists in conservative culture. Like you've seen this before.
Yeah.
Especially stereotypically older men will think that anger is somehow
not an emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just accuse other people of being way too emotional when they themselves have emotional regulation issues. And I would say that Mark Driscoll very clearly has emotional regulation issues.
Yeah.
You don't get accused of multiple scandals and, get ousted from your own church after being proven to have emotionally and verbally abused like dozens of people without having like an emotional regulation.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, beyond just like the hypocrisy of this, of him saying that it's okay to be emotional, but then he clearly has problems with other people exhibiting emotions that he doesn't find appropriate or masculine.
Or just not his.
I do kind of want to like push back on what he's saying though, because to me, I interpreted it as, if you have an emotion, you're upset about something, then what you need to do is just try to control that emotion and pray about it. And that will somehow transfer it to your front brain, whatever that means. And I actually don't think that that's a good idea I'm not very credentialed in psychology or anything, but in my experience being in counseling for the last 3 years, the thing that's helped me make an improvement is allowing myself to feel emotions and not try to like force myself to just take control of it. Because that was something that growing up as an evangelical that was kind of ingrained in my head, is that it's wrong to feel certain things, that you shouldn't feel bad or sad or angry, that you need to control that emotion. And I feel like what's helped me is saying like, it's okay for me to feel certain things.
Yeah.
The only thing that's not okay is if I do something or hurt somebody else with that emotion.
Yeah. So you saw this as more of a suppression.
That's kind of how I...
Yeah, I can see how you would see it that way. I was trying to interpret it as charitably as I possibly could.
Well, I mean, when it comes to Mark Driscoll, I don't think that we need to be taking things charitably. I'm pretty sure that's what he means by it.
Yeah, I would not put that past him. He may very well be right.
Yeah.
Young men are like trucks, a lot of energy, but unless you load them up with responsibility, they're going to end up in the ditch. Any of you driven a two-wheel drive in the snow or in the rain? It's hard to keep it straight. Young men need more responsibility, not less. This is why the last few years, just telling young men, the way you're a good citizen is you stay home on the couch and wait for the government to send you money. It took all of the responsibility off an entire generation of young men. Now they're struggling with mental health and depression and suicide. It's because they're not going to work. You can't be depressed if you're at work. You got to work. You can't sit there all day and try and figure out what your gender is if you got to go to work. Look down, should be obvious.
Okay, so there is a lot
Yeah, that was
to address.
bad.
But my first question is, who is telling our generation or young people that what they need to be doing is just sitting on the couch and waiting for the government to send them a check? Like,
Yeah.
who is saying that?
I've heard no progressive or woke person ever say something
Yeah.
like that.
I mean, I think that our generation is more aware of the adverse consequences of overworking,
Yeah.
That we acknowledge that it's not a healthy thing for us to be working 60 or 70 hour work weeks, which I think Mark Driscoll would view as a good thing to be doing. And we also want to be paid fairly for the work that we do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is that, but that is a whole different thing
Absolutely.
from us saying, oh, we just want to like sit around and do nothing and like just be paid for it from the government.
Right. One of the reasons our generation has that stance, I think, is because we've actually seen evidence that overwork leads to all of the adverse outcomes he's saying that overwork prevents. You know, in Japan, like it's kind of the classic example, they have a pretty horrendous overworking culture.
Right.
And they even have entire cultural concepts and pieces of vocabulary that describe death by overwork. And at one of the highest suicide rates in the world, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that is correlated to the overwork. And so there's really actually the correlation goes, or the causation goes the opposite way to what he's saying. But of course, he doesn't care for any kind of like research. He's not quoting any kind of statistic or anything for this.
He's just making statements as though they're completely factually true.
Yeah.
And it's also just like so obvious that people get depressed at work all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone who hasn't said that they've experienced times at work or had a day at work where they were not feeling good. Like, it's very, very common.
Absolutely.
So I feel like he's just completely pulling that out of his ass in order to like serve his overall point.
Right.
And also the thing at the end where he was saying like, oh, just your gender should be obvious. Just like look down and you should see it. And it's like, how often has he been told that gender and biological sex are two different things? And that's something that experts in the field of psychology
take seriously,
like have been talking about for
since the 70s.
Yeah, for decades.
Probably more than that.
So he knows that gender doesn't boil down to your genitalia.
Yeah, and as we've seen, he's okay with just kind of pulling things out of his ass, and there's actual data to back up the opposite of his conclusion. He still throws that out, so it doesn't matter how many times he's been told. But also, I do think that there is, while yes, you can be chronically overworked and still realize that you're queer. That is absolutely a thing that can happen and does happen. There is validity to the idea that chronic overwork can kind of make it to where you will not have ideas that challenge the status quo quite as often. You won't have the time to do the work to challenge any kind of the power structures around you. So authoritarians classically like to push this idea that we need to have this like judging your moral character by your productivity and responsibility type thing. And it's just because it eliminates the competition. Yeah. Right?
He's acting as though it's like a good thing to be so distracted that you don't have time for critical thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
He's in another thing that I think we reacted to. Him and some other dude were talking about how it's a good thing to not ask questions.
Yeah.
Like asking questions is bad. And I'm like, how are you an adult that thinks asking questions is bad?
He thinks other people asking questions is bad because he is in a position of authority.
Well, convenient for him.
Right. Oh, God, this one's about dating.
What a lot of guys will do when they're dating, they're very short-sighted. They think, well, I want to have sex. That's not a bad end zone, okay? But that's in marriage, so get a job, move out of your parents' house. Just telling you, if you follow the yellow brick road, I mean, that's where you got to go. That's the path. Yeah? Move out of your parents' house, get a job, be responsible for yourself. Yeah, get off their cell phone bill. Somebody just got delivered. I was like, whoa, that's amazing. Oh, yeah. Get off their insurance, okay? It says that a man will leave his mother and father. That means he's going to be independent, responsible, then marry his wife, and then consummate their covenant. What a lot of guys want, they want sex, but they don't want marriage. And the truth is that the lie that the culture tells is that sex is the deepest connection. It's not. Actually, the deepest connection is not at the level of the body. It's at the connection of the soul.
That bit at the end is kind of strange to me because I was taught that, and the concept of soul ties.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have sex with someone, your soul is knit together with them.
Yeah.
And the reason
I thought that too.
Yeah, the reason why you don't have sex with multiple people is because once your soul is knit together, it must tear and be damaged in order to have sex with somebody else. And so I find it strange that he's saying that people outside of Christianity are the ones that are saying that sex is the deepest connection, which, first of all, maybe there are people who say that, but I certainly haven't heard that. In Christianity, that's kind of where that seems to come from most of the time.
Mm-hmm. But he did say, if you are motivated by sex, if you ultimately care about having sex, that's not a bad end zone, is what he said. So he's acknowledging that in his paradigm or Christian culture, that having the ultimate goal of having sex, getting into a relationship for sex is not a bad thing, but you have to do it through marriage.
Yeah.
But then at the end, he says, but that's not the deepest level of a relationship. Soul bonding is the deepest level.
Right.
It's like he's kind of contradicting himself in that.
Yeah, I see that.
I mean, is it a bad thing if you get married and you're still on your parents' insurance? I mean, because in this day and age, with the country and the state that it is in, that's the reality for a lot of people our age, because most people don't make enough in order to make ends meet.
Yeah.
That's not our fault.
It's really a very modern concept to think that families will not be enmeshed any more than having a nuclear family, that you won't have a multi-generational home. That's kind of a product of like pro-America, pro-breeding, anti-communist propaganda from the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah.
It's not like just the Bible. Yes, he's quoting a verse that's actually in the Bible, but a lot of biblical families had multi-generational homes. I mean, they were sharing resources. They didn't have insurance necessarily, but they were sharing resources.
Yeah. I mean, is there
sinful?
Anywhere in the Bible where it says, don't be on your parents' insurance?
Yeah. Again, he's using this paradigm that he has in order to take a very anachronistic reading of ancient scriptures that really had nothing to do with the thing he's talking about today.
Yeah.
You're not a man if you don't work. God made men to work. God didn't make men to vote for other men to tax men who do work so they don't have to work. This is before sin enters the world and before the curse. This is the perfect world before sin enters in. You and I are made to work. This is why the Protestant work ethic, it said that we are to work, so people worked, and this is why Protestants started giving our children chores. As early as possible, you need to learn how to work. And by giving even a child chores, we're giving them responsibility, we're teaching them the value of work, and we're preparing them to work.
Okay, is it just me, or did he make a really extreme error in describing the fall of humanity described by like the Genesis account? So if you recall, after, Adam and Eve's sin, Eve's curse is that it will be painful for her to have children.
Yeah.
Childbirth will be painful. And Adam's curse is that he will have to work the ground and work it by the sweat of his brow. His curse, man's curse, is that he has to work.
Yeah.
So he's saying this is before the curse? Like before the curse, they were walking around in a paradisal garden, apparently.
And isn't kind of the main narrative from Christians that we were designed to worship God and serve God?
Yeah.
Where is he getting the idea that we were made, or men specifically were, like, God designed them to work?
Yeah. I mean,
I feel like that's another thing he's just kind of pulling out of his ass and not supporting with anything. He's not even doing like the lazy Christian thing of cherry picking the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. The very first thing that you said, I think, in this whole video was the best description of what he's doing is he is starting with Christian conservatism of today, and maybe since the 1940s and 50s, and then interpreting the Bible through that, even if he has to.
He's starting with that and then make it like interpreting the Bible to say that. Basically.
Yeah, that's a very good example of him doing that.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of insinuating, like what he's saying right here kind of makes the insinuation that what women do, which in his world is mostly taking care of children in the home, that's not considered work.
Yeah, that makes me wonder if he takes the view that many people had in antiquity, or at least a lot of men had in antiquity, that women are actually inferior to men. Like, they're not just, different roles. They are actually inferior to men, subservient to men for a reason. And so, I mean, is he saying, like, he's saying you're not good unless you work, but the way he is saying that is saying you're not a man unless you work.
Yeah. So what does that leave women to do then?
Right.
Like, what's a woman's job? I mean, is taking care of kids in the home not considered work? Like, how do we quantify what work is?
Yeah. My parting comment is that this guy thinks about men a lot.
Yeah, he really does. He is very focused on men.
I mean,
you really love men, dude.
If that's what he's into, then like I'm not gonna be the one that shames him. But it seems like he's
running away from that hard, if that's the case.
Yeah. classic compensation and projection here, possibly.
Yeah.
I hope to all of the men out there that Mark Driscoll is not actually interested in pursuing relationships with men, but unfortunately, there is at least one woman who is in a relationship with him, and that's yikes. The way he treats her and talks about her doesn't bode well for anybody else he might be attracted to.
The main thing, like the main takeaway I have of Mark Driscoll is that, like, this is something I've seen him do pretty much in every sermon or anything he ever talks about, is that he'll just like make a statement without backing it up at all. Like he'll start out with this faulty premise, and then he'll build his entire argument based off of that faulty premise and not attempt to substantiate it with any type of evidence or data. So I mean, really, I think all this guy does is just pull stuff out of his ass, and he says it in a very brash and aggressive and charismatic way in order to draw people in and gain power for himself, essentially.
Unfortunately, it seems to work well enough for him to be the head of a pretty successful church.
I mean, yeah, it's scary to me, the fact that he has been exposed for emotionally abusing people in his church at his prior church, which was a mega church that existed for like over 20 years called Mars Hill. And there's been this entire like documentary essentially made on Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll. And like everyone knows that he has done a bunch of like fucked up things. And yet he still is able to kind of rebuild his entire brand, and now has a fairly, I don't think it's a mega church, but a fairly large church in Arizona. I'm like, what is going to stop this guy? I don't know what it is, which is why I'm like dedicating so much of my channel to talking about him, because I feel like he's learned nothing. He's literally learned nothing from those experiences.
And a lot of other people haven't learned from the fact that he's been kind of exposed as somewhat of a character. I would say Mark Driscoll, the Andrew Tate of evangelical Christianity.
That's a good descriptor for him.
He does not like this.
He's been so overwhelmed the last couple of days. Thanks so much for watching, and a huge thank you to my patrons who help make these videos possible. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my Instagram is Taylor_the_antibot. If you'd like to consider supporting this channel financially, a link to my Patreon will be down in the description, and we'll see you all in the next one. Say bye!